Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, only NFL podcast. One of the hosts gets slapped with a tag every day. That's Lenny. I guess he just leaves the tag on. I'm Mina Kimes. It's franchise tag day, but it's also the NFL news is coming fast and furious right now, including Kyler Murray being released. I'm going to talk about that with my guest, Dan Pizzuta. Dan, I don't even know where to begin. The Murray thing is crazy because we knew it was going to happen, but seeing it, he just posted, you know, he's thanking everyone for his time in Arizona. It's now been reported that because of the amount of money he has guaranteed, $37 million in 2026 with offsets, he can play somewhere for the minimum. I mean, this is massive news.
Yeah, it was one of those things where we kind of felt like this was coming. There was always the chance of a trade. And I think the reporting still, as we hear, is they're going to release him barring a trade. So I guess that's still possible. But if now you know you're going to have Kyler released and you can possibly just get him on the minimum because of that guaranteed salary he's already getting paid, why would you give anything up? Especially because I think if he's on the roster on March 17th, which is why this is happening now, his 2027 salary gets guaranteed too. So I think if you were a team who is potentially looking for Kyler, you're just waiting for him to get released. I think that makes a lot of sense for like a Minnesota now. That probably wasn't a team that made a lot of sense trading for him and taking on all that money. But now if you can fit him in on something that's pretty small, fits under your cap, makes a lot more sense.
So many teams should be interested in Kyler who need quarterbacks because of what you just described. I'm just going to run down the list of the teams. The Jets, obviously, the Cardinals, the Browns. I'm just going in draft order at the moment. Miami is a sneaky potential place, I would say. Minnesota, who we'll get to in a second. Pittsburgh. I don't think I've heard people talking about Kyler to Pittsburgh, but like they should absolutely. I mean, that should be an option for him. Those are the obvious ones. I'm not leaving anyone out, right? I think that would be Atlanta, I guess. I mean, it's the minimum. Atlanta. But let's talk about Minnesota because that's been, I think, the name that has gotten the most attention, perhaps. And it's a name that makes the most sense, not just because of where they are as a franchise, but also because of what I think Kyler Murray should be looking for, right? Which is if he's going to play and the money's not a factor right now, he should want to play in the place that sets him up best for a career renaissance. And Minnesota, I mean, I think some of the other teams I mentioned do have interest and I do want to talk about them, but Minnesota is obvious. This was the quarterback away team. This is the team that should have been a playoff team last year, had a great, fantastic defense, has Justin Jefferson, has a decent offensive line, but just didn't have a quarterback. And a question that's been thrown around a lot this offseason is who's the next Sam Darnold, right? Like who's the next reclamation project, veteran quarterback who can come back. So I'll just give you like a couple of numbers. When Sam Darnold signed with the Vikings, his last 2 years in the NFL, he had the 2 Carolina years, and then he played 1 game in San Francisco. He was, 44th 55th in QPR and 41st in EPA per dropback. Kyler Murray's last 2 seasons that he's the last before this, so I'm not counting his MVP quality season I'm talking the last 2 seasons. 15th in both of those metrics. 15th. Like at minimum, you're getting an average, you know what I mean? Like, so it feels like a no-brainer for Minnesota to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's one of the things where we've really kind of underrated Kyler and what he's been over the past couple of years. And even in 2025, when he was playing, he, didn't have enough to like end up for, the passer rating title, which, if you're ranking things based on like qualifiers, he doesn't get in there. But he ended up, because of his rushing still, which I think is continually an overlooked part that still raises the floor of his game. He finished the same EPA per play as Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson this year. And obviously those are very different ways we view how those three quarterbacks came to it, and the fourth with Kyler. But there's still this floor there. And I said this on the Athletic Football Show before the Combine last week. We were talking about Kyler a little bit. And the weird thing about Kyler in 2025 was there was no variance in how he played. So I went through the quarterback's best EPA per play game and worst EPA per play game. And Kyler had the second best worst game, but the worst best game.
Yeah.
And that's not really how we usually think about Kyler. Usually it's a much higher range. But even in his bad year, where there wasn't much variance, there was still a pretty high floor, even though the ceiling wasn't there. You put him on a team like Minnesota, I have a much better feeling that the ceiling is going to get there, especially since what we saw with Kevin O'Connell, what he was kind of able to do the last 4 games with JJ McCarthy, where the numbers looks pretty good, but I still don't think JJ McCarthy played that well. So I think that would be a really good fit where they can kind of get the best out of each other.
I mean, if you're Minnesota, what else are you considering here? Giving up serious draft capital for Mac Jones, because that's what it's going to take.
Right.
Geno Smith, who was far inferior to Kyler last season and is 36. Aaron Rodgers, who was also inferior to Kyler last season, by the way.
Yes.
Is 42. No, I'm just saying, what's giving? We'll get to the Daniel Jones news, but like trying to compete with Indianapolis for a quarterback coming off of an Achilles tear in December, just seems like a no-brainer. And then everything,
Malik Willis, who's probably maybe Kyler, like in your best case scenario,
and who's going to cost you upwards
more.
of $30 million. Like it's Malik Willis to Minnesota has always been very financially difficult for me to imagine. Like it just seems obvious that this is the way. I mean, you could trade for. The only reason you wouldn't do it is if you really believe JJ McCarthy still has a chance, and you want to bring in competition but not a starter. Because I think if Kyler Murray goes to Minnesota, Kyler Murray is your starting quarterback. Whereas if you were to take like Rodgers, probably not, but like a Geno, that would be more of like, okay, let's see. I don't think they view him that way based on just reading the tea leaves. So yeah, I just do it. And then suddenly it's like, okay, because they had to clear. So there's a report today that they're considering trading Jonathan Grenard, which sucks because he's a good player, but that's the financial situation they're in. But now you're looking at pick 18 and there's a lot of things you can do, I think, to help either side of the ball. They're one of my favorite trade up for Jeremiyah Love teams, even though I don't think it'll happen. But yeah, this would make me pretty excited to see what the Vikings do next year. I don't know. Look, Kyler, I'm not going to pretend hasn't had his ups and downs. And I also am not going to say that this puts them in contention in the NFC North necessarily, but his highs are very high. And as we've discussed, the floor, I think that's what people miscalculate about him, because it seems like the league is a lot lower on him than his actual performance, candidly. Right. And some of that is certainly no doubt like the infamous homework cloud, all that. But like, I do think he sets a floor with you that would be better than anything we saw in Minnesota last year. So I would pull the trigger absolutely if I'm the Vikings on this.
Yeah, and I think we saw the floor last year for Minnesota was as low as a floor gets for the quarterback play, really, especially when you look at the first couple of games of JJ McCarthy. I think you add in what Kyler can do. His legs are going to help a run game that Minnesota has been trying to figure out for like the entire Kevin O'Connell era. So whether you are getting in a running back who can help or not, I think having a quarterback like Kyler could certainly help. And so I think there are a lot of things that make sense. And I just think that this is the quarterback team fit that makes the most sense, just because there's a lot of teams looking for quarterbacks right now. Like what does Kyler to the Jets do for either party?
Yeah,
really at this point, I'm not sure. So it is just one of those fits that makes a lot of sense.
Let's revisit the other teams I mentioned. I think that the 3 that feel the most like maybe would be Miami, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh. Of those 3, so you have to look at this from both Kyler's perspective and the team's perspective. Let's start with Kyler's perspective. of those 3 teams, do any come close to Minnesota as a possible destination in your mind?
That they wouldn't for me. I mean, as Pittsburgh is the one that's trying to win, which I guess is if you're Kyler, you probably would rather be on that type of team than, you know, Miami would be so fun if Mike McDaniel was still there, but I
Yeah.
just don't think this version of what the Dolphins are trying to accomplish, the getting younger, is something that's going to make a lot of sense. I guess Pittsburgh would be the closest one where they clearly are trying to win. That's what the Mike McCarthy hire kind of showed us. Even if the ceiling might not be very high with what the roster is, still a veteran roster, I think they're still going to try to be competitive. So that would be the other one that would kind of make sense. But still, I think if you're Kyler, you probably want to go to Minnesota more than you would
Yeah.
Pittsburgh.
I think so. I think from Pittsburgh's perspective, I would call him and I definitely gauge interest. I've been long saying I like Pittsburgh as a Malik Willis destination. By all reports, it sounds everything that I'm hearing, it sounds like Aaron Rodgers returning is the front runner, which I would not be happy about if I was a Steelers fan. I would
No.
much rather go in one of those 2 younger directions. And maybe it won't work out, but we know what's going to happen if it's
Right.
Rodgers. You know what I mean? Like at
Yeah.
least give us some freaking hope. Atlanta's so tricky because of the Penix Jr. like Michael Penix Jr. It's not clear. Like JJ, I think we know that someone's going to be brought in to start. Penix Jr., it's like, it sounds like they're going to at least give him a chance. So I think from the outside, if you're Kyler, there's some question marks. I think from Atlanta's perspective, it would be great to have Kyler on a minimum. That's the dream. But I think
Yeah.
for Kyler, it's like, okay, well, you'd have to. This is a team that previous organization, well, they weren't exactly clear about what directions they were going in the quarterback position. So you would want some clarity. I think if I'm Kyler and somebody from Atlanta, Kevin Stefanski, new organization, right? Cunningham came to me and said, you're going to be the front runner. I would definitely consider that because I think that's a competitive ascendant team, some good
Yeah.
pieces. It'd be an interesting fit. Bijan with him in the backfield, all that. But you would need to have the clarity there. So we'll see. So next week is going to be a very interesting one with regards to Kyler Murray because obviously it's too early for him to. I think we'll start hearing reports though of the most likely destination soon. We should hit Arizona's side of this. Arizona is so odd to me, Dan, because it's like on one hand, I understand why they are wiping the slate clean in a lot of regards, right?
Yeah.
Both the coach, the quarterback, all of this, it felt like that era had to come to an end. But doing it now is like they're not really getting anything out of it on either regard. Like I felt like moving on from the coach and the quarterback this offseason did not position them very well. If it were me, it would be a take your medicine year. But I have heard them associated with Malik Willis, for example. I have heard them as a Jeremiyah Love drafting team, which is insane to me. Like,
Yeah.
so it sucks. You're in, unfortunately, a division with 3 of the best coaches in football and best teams, but I don't know how I feel about like the plan at this moment.
Yeah, it does seem weird. So I went into it. It went into like combine week thinking maybe we were overrating the likelihood that Kyler is getting released or traded just because of the teams who could potentially be looking for quarterbacks. They had the highest bar for improvement. And I think just regardless of what you think about Kyler, it's true. But then you heard anyone talk at the combine. It's like, no, this is actually happening. But
Yeah.
it is a weird fit because I like the offense. I think Michael Ford is going to do some fun things. There are a lot of fun pieces in this offense where I think you're going to be able to figure out a run game a little bit with some of the stuff that LaFleur is going to bring over from what the Rams did. If you figure out what Marvin Harrison Jr. can be at receiver. Michael Wilson was incredible last year from week 11 on, was second in receiving yards to Puka Nacua. And then you have, Trey McBride and the tight ends that they can roll out. So there are a lot of fun things that could be in place in this offense. But yeah, I don't know exactly what they're feeling because you don't, for them, they don't save a lot from moving on from Kyler. And that would be one of those things where I would have said, let's hold on to Kyler for 2026. We don't really know how we're going to upgrade. You'd probably have more options in 2027, whether, you're bad again and it's a better quarterback class. Again, we always say that, but I think actually like this is going to be a year where that really does count.
Yeah.
And so it is just, I'm not totally sure what their long-term plan is right now, but it just seems like they wanted to make a change, so they did.
I know everybody always says, well, you always say next year, but everybody said that in 2023 and everybody was right. That was like an amazing quarterback class. So I just want to point out, it wasn't that long ago that the next year is better proved to be correct. So I know it's hard to hear. It feels like every year, but literally, and then when 24 came, we all said, it's happening, guys. And it has, again, proven to be correct. Minnesota fans were like, did you not just hear it? I literally just heard you crap on our quarterback. So the Colts have decided to put the transition tag on Daniel Jones. So for those who don't know, what that means is, as opposed to a non-exclusive franchise tag, one, it's less money. So the transition tag for a quarterback is about $38 million. I think it would be about $5 million more for the full-on franchise tag. But with the franchise tag, if a team decides to give them an offer and you don't give the quarterback or the player rather an offer and you don't match it, you get 2 firsts back. So it's very prohibitive for anyone to compete. It just doesn't happen. With the transition tag, which is also something I can't even remember the last time Kyle Duggar. It just doesn't happen very often. But with the transition tag for a player, if a team, let's say a Jets, I don't know, the Vikings, who are apparently the perceived stalking horse in all of this, we'll get to that, wanted to give him a deal, the Colts would have the option to match it, but if they don't match it, they get nothing in return and they would be left in the quarterback wilderness. This is a decision with a ripple effect because it means they cannot, any kind of tag, you only get to do one. So they can't tag Alec Pierce, who now becomes, now that Pickens has been tagged, the gem of the free agency wide receiver class. By the time you're listening to this, there might be some reporting on the Colts trying to get something done with Pierce before the actual tampering window opens. But let's talk about Jones first. First, flat out, what do you think his decision? Did it surprise you? Where are you at on it?
Yeah, like a little bit. I think it all kind of plays together because I wouldn't be surprised if them putting the tag on Jones does mean they're much closer to an extension with Pierce. It kind of feels like if you put the transition tag on Jones, you're not really worried about another team coming in and making an offer. And I kind of feel like if they had let Jones get to free agency, they probably wouldn't have been too worried about another team making an offer there either. So it feels like they didn't need to put the tag on Pierce is how I'm going to read this. And maybe I'm giving the Colts front office a little too much credit by that reading, but it does feel like they might be closer to an extension with Pierce, which then opened up the tag for Jones instead of like the other way around and choosing Jones here. But this kind of feels like they're just buying their time, where we have no idea what Daniel Jones is going to look like coming off an Achilles injury. We've seen some older quarterbacks take some time to come back from it. Aaron Rodgers did not look great. Kirk Cousins looked okay early, and then he had that shoulder injury, which I feel like is what made him worse that first year in Atlanta rather than the Achilles injury. But mobility is a big piece of the Daniel Jones game too. And that's so much of being able to move in the pocket for someone who still doesn't have the greatest pocket presence. It's interesting. I think probably, you just are kind of in a holding pattern. You get to see what he does for probably the second half of the year when he comes in and is healthy enough to start, because we don't really even know when he's going to be able to get on the field coming back from this injury.
This is hard to talk about without knowing how the injury is going to affect him next year and beyond. First of all, as far as the tag goes, I'm going to wait to see what happens with Alec Pierce before I really, like you said, weigh in on how I feel about that. They made the Barkley Daniel Jones choice, basically.
Right.
If they get a deal done with Pierce and it's reasonable, then I think that kind of changes how we feel about that the holistic view of this. Putting a tag on player for me just generally makes sense because you definitely don't. I had heard they were trying to negotiate a multi-year deal. I think that would have been a mistake.
Right.
1-year deal. Let's see what he's got. Let's see what he looks like. So I think if I have to applaud the Colts for something here, or if there's some aspect of this that I agree with, it's that buying more time, essentially. I am a little bit perplexed by the apparent market for Daniel Jones. I think the reporting when people say that the Vikings would have tried to sign him, but it's a little befuddling to me given the injury, and he's coming off of the best half season of his career.
Right.
But this is one, he has an injury history already, of course. And this is a tough one, man. I mean, you talked about Cousins. So Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles in October. Daniel Jones tore his in December. Cousins came back, started right away. And you mentioned the shoulder. He couldn't play under center. He just couldn't that first year. The under center play action game is very important. So even if Daniel Jones is younger, so I imagine that'll accelerate his timeline. But best case scenario, if he comes back, I don't know, early in the season, is he going to look anything close to Daniel Jones? Like you said, athleticism is a big part of his game. It just all feels very. The Colts feel like they were backed into a corner, and this is the best, most risk-averse thing that they could do because they didn't have any other options at quarterback. But my reticence just stems from what we've seen out of these quarterbacks coming off. And I say that as somebody who I think way overvalued Kirk Cousins as a free agent off the Achilles because I didn't know. I was like, he'll be fine. But he was not fine. In fact, I would argue only this year did he start to look like himself in terms of pocket movement. So we'll see, man. I mean, I'd love to be wrong because it was really crappy what happened to him. You bet on yourself, you play amazing. But I don't know. This feels tenuous. So and we'll see what happens with Pierce. That'll get done, I'm sure, pretty quickly in free agency. So we'll know then.
Yeah, it just like you said, it does feel like the Colts kind of didn't have a better option. And we just talked all that time about Kyler, who is just clearly the best quarterback on the market. And if you're the Colts and you don't go with Daniel Jones, if you're also not in the Kyler market, it's going to be a tough place to be for a quarterback when you have the rest of this roster that was really set up in the middle of last season with the picks traded, the Sauce Gardner trade, everything that, this needs to be a good season, especially when, you might be Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard still, playing, coaching, GMing for their jobs in 2026 too. So it's a tough place that the Colts ended up being. It kind of seems like it's the least bad answer. Because like you said, I would much rather Daniel Jones on the tag than try to lower some massive extension with a lowered cap hit for 2026. But now you're betting on Daniel Jones in the future. I would much rather be able to have the tag and kind of see how it goes and see how it plays out and then work from there.
One of the other players who was tagged, so Pickens and Pitts were already tagged. Breece Hall came in, as the third. Daniel Jones is the fourth, so 4 players were tagged. He got the non-exclusive tag. There's no chance in hell a team is going to try to pay Breece Hall and trade 2 first-rounders, so that means he's going to be a Jet. Poor Breece Hall, who tweeted, always been the type to bet on myself. Been working. See y'all soon, love. Okay, so I have trouble getting too worked up about this from the Jets' perspective. They're not going to be good this year. They don't have many foundational players on the roster right now. He's one of them. And they have a lot of money. So it's fine, I think, for them to keep it, especially, we'll see what they do at the quarterback position. But if this year just continues to be about developing the foundation of the team that is going to, I understand the tag and maybe, they wanted to get a deal done, it sounds like. I'm sure that the nerd answer is to say this is a bad decision, but I have trouble getting worked up about this team from like an opportunity cost perspective.
Yeah, for the Jets, I think it's fine just because of, like you said, their situation. You could argue that they don't have anything on the roster, so why a running back? But they have like $58 million in effective cap space, and that's when you factor in what's probably going to cost their draft class. That's the fifth most. They freed up about what they're going to use on the tag with the Jermaine Johnson trade that they had last week. So it's basically just a net zero there. So it's fine. I think after not trading Breece Hall at the deadline last year, you kind of had to do this. You can't not trade him last year and then just let him walk for free. And because you have so many holes in the roster, you're not going to get a comp pick back for whatever contract he signs. So now I think you kind of hold on to him. 14 million is, it's defined. It's probably a lot for, when a running back, even a player like Breece Hall. But, I think we kind of look at the running back landscape. There's possibilities someone gets desperate missing out on like the Kenneth Walker sweepstakes that I think a trade could still be possible before the season. And then again, you have him at the deadline and you're in a similar position that you were last year, where if a team in contention wants a running back for the stretch run, that I think that's possibly still on the table. So I don't think the Jets are locking themselves into anything here. So I think there's still a couple ways that they can get out of this and still potentially Breece Hall ends up somewhere else too.
Yeah, Walker would be one of the winners here because I would say him and Breece were pretty universally seen as the two most appealing running backs in free agency, and now he has the crown. Also, Walker has explosive play potential that, as much as I would love like a guy like a Algier or Gainwell in terms of efficiency and style, Walker's your home run hitter. I think he's, to me, a cut above ETN, who would probably be the next back.
Right.
It'll be, I think I'm really excited for running back free agency because I think it'll tell us a lot about the draft as well. Like who's taking themselves out of the Jeremiyah Love sweepstakes in the draft, right?
Yeah.
Like Kansas City is the obvious name at 9, but teams like New Orleans, Minnesota, who I mentioned, Houston did a running back trade, which made me think we'll talk about that in a second, but they're not going to be a big bidder. And also I don't think they think they're in Love striking range. So it'll be fascinating. I always, the first day I have to like exercise caution. And when the first days of free agency, my mind always immediately spins to the draft. And it's like, no, let's take a second and talk about these teams. And we're going to talk about that next week. And I'll put out a lot of stuff around it, but I do love it for reading the tea leaves. And we're going to talk about Jeremiyah Love, by the way, in the second. I should have said this at the beginning. Second half of the podcast, we're talking about the combine winners and losers. Sorry, I just got so worked. The Kyler news dropped right before we started taping. We're going to talk about the combine though, and the draft and some of the ripple effects there. I did hit on 2 players who were tagged. I didn't talk about either of them really at length on the pod, but Pickens and Pitts. Neither are particularly surprising, right? Given what they would have respectively commanded in free agency. Pickens, most notably, was someone who would have just, exploded like the amount of money. I think they're both. Some of my hesitation in talking about both these players is, I think the stories are not quite over, right? Like Pitts could very well be. Both could get extensions. Pitts could be traded. So both defensible decisions because of the players and their value, but I also, Dan, feel like something could happen with both these players in the coming months.
Yeah. And like for Dallas, I think it would be smart to extend Pickens, just because I think financially that helps them too. I think you're looking at like $27.3 million franchise tag right now. And that's something that all of that goes on the cap in 1 year because it's only a 1 year deal. So if you extend them, you can lower that a little bit. Dallas is a team that needs to free up some money, which, they can with restructures of Dak, CD, and Tyler Smith that can clear like almost $60 million. But I think Dallas is a team that needs to bring in some more free agents, probably especially on the defensive side. So I think if you get Pickens on an extension, not only does that help you by having a receiver who we saw what that does to open up the offense, it also just gives you some more financial flexibility down the line. Although we also have seen Dallas is not a team that particularly cares about that. Could have gotten so many extensions earlier to help them out with that.
Just do a normal contract and do it early and then use the money. Like Dan said, please don't drag this out. I also feel like with a player like Pickens, like, do you really want him playing on the tag?
Yeah.
Is he going to be normal about it? That's unfair because, I think it's reasonable for players to be upset about being tagged, but he would be a guy who you're like, there's a little bit of the personality management as well. I've gone back and forth on Pickens and the extension and the Bengals being a potentially cautionary tale with the 2 wide receiver thing. I will say this though, with Dallas, last year they had an offense that was like 4th in yards per play and 5th in EPA per play. So the decision to run it back with Pickens and Williams, who did get done on a very normal, reasonable contract, the running back, it makes you have proof of concept. You just got to smash it on the draft. And like you said, if you do a Pickens deal, you also clear up a little bit of room. I think there's some other contracts but you got to smash it. You got to hit every pick, every little contract, every vet to get that defense towards average. You got to be pretty flawless this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, going to Kyle Pitts, it's fascinating just because of how relatively cheap it is. $15 million tag, which makes
just do it.
Yeah. So I was looking right now, tight end and center are the only 2 positions that don't have a player making a $20 million average. And that's going to change with center because of Tyler Linderbaum this offseason. So you have and I think this is just going to kind of be fascinating to see where the tight end market goes, because you have a guy like Pitts who's, when he's healthy, has been good. We have about 2 healthy seasons from Kyle Pitts right now, and they were both very fun. He was 2nd in receiving yards last year, 2.14 yards per route run against man coverage, which he did on over a quarter of his routes, and that was 2nd to Tucker Kraft and Colby Parkinson. There's a $12 million difference between the wide receiver tag and the tight end tag, and we're seeing those types of players kind of be closer together than they have been as we see more tight ends. So I think more so than like Kyle Pitts in general, I'm just kind of fascinated to see what the tight end market starts to look like if we have an extension here. Because you're only going to push it so far. Kyle Pitts isn't going to make more than George Kittle on an extension. So I just think kind of like the dominoes that we see now with the next couple of like draft classes that we saw from tight ends. I just think that we have a bit of a market of inefficiency here while tight ends are getting more important.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Pitts is such a complicated case too because of the production, which is to say the barbell nature of his career. Even last year, like there was some streakiness to his what he did, and obviously London being hurt, you saw some of his usage step up. So I would say he's improved as a blocker, but he's still not like a all around guy. So it'll be interesting to see how he is valued. You mentioned center, and I wanted to hit on a piece of NFL news before we get to the David Montgomery trade to wrap this part, which is that Drew Dalman, the Bears center, retired. Surprising after getting an extension. Big part of the turnaround in the Bears run game and the offensive line. Massive hole, right? If you're Chicago, you feel like, great, we finally got the offensive line set. Offense is trending in the right direction, and boom. The first thing that hit me is a lot of teams need centers right now. I was thinking about it because when we did free agency preview and I talked about Tyler Linderbaum, I just started rattling off teams, and there were so many. And now here's first of all, he's going to make an incredible amount of money, obviously.
Yeah.
But I can think of, like, off the top of my head, like 10 teams that like, and yeah, it's just, I think from what I gather of the draft, I texted Michael Jr. and asked him what he thought about the class. He mentioned there's the Iowa kid whose name now Jones or Johnson, it escapes me, Slaughter from Florida. Hecht from K-State. He said he likes Parker from Duke, Zune. So there's definitely some options in the draft, but as far as like a guy to come in and start, it just, I don't know, for these playoff teams that need centers, I'll be curious to see what they do.
Yeah, and I think we've seen when you have, a guy like Dalman coming in who, not, I wouldn't say it was a top tier center, but I think you see from what someone like him as an improvement on what the Bears had in previous years, what that can do for a young quarterback. Having that type of center it really matters, and kind of what he was able to do with some of the, in the run game and all of that in the Ben Johnson offense. It's fascinating. It's definitely shocking that it came, and it seemed like they had some cohesiveness along that offensive line that seemed like it was going to be a bit of a strength. But now for the Bears specifically to have to rework that, find another center. And then, like you said, we don't really get a lot of center movement around the league to where it's great. And I think even if Tyler Linderbaum isn't a great fit for everyone, I think everyone's going to be invested in Tyler Linderbaum just because the other options, you have a Cade Mays and there's some other like, mid-tier free agents who could certainly help. But I think Linderbaum is going to, yes.
Buffalo is going to make a lot of money. Yeah. I was just about to pull up my list of free agents to like think about the next tier. That would be the one name that there's not a lot of centers, man. It's a lot. I don't see it. Like, Mays. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that not just Linderbaum, but some of those other contracts surprise people because of the amount of need. I mean, the Bears do save some money with the retirement, not like a ton, but but they do not have a lot of cap, and there's great needs on defense, obviously. So it's going to be an interesting juggling for the interesting decisions to be made. Okay, well, let's stay in the NFC North and talk about the Lions trading David Montgomery, because I found this to be kind of fascinating. The Texans had a really busy day. They did a couple of trades, not just the David Montgomery trade. They also traded Titus Howard, their offensive tackle, to the Browns, and they got a 5th round draft pick in return, and the Browns gave Titus Howard an extension. And then they traded with the Lions. They sent, I want to make sure I get these details right, a 4th round draft pick and Juice Scruggs, who is an interior offensive lineman, in return for David Montgomery and a 7th. Okay, so let's talk about this from the Texans standpoint. I'm kind of torn here because, first of all, Montgomery, the player, I actually like. Separate from the value, I actually like the player a lot for them. I thought he's just more of an all-around back. He can also, I would say he's underused. He was underused in Detroit as a pass catcher because of the rise of Jahmyr Gibbs. People forget in Chicago, he caught a lot of passes. He can pass protect. I think he's suitable for different schemes. Texans have started doing a bit more in terms of on the ground scheme-wise. He's not making a ton of money. He's 29, but last year he had like 0.8 rushing yards over expected per carry, which is quite good. It's 11th amongst high volume backs. People listen to this podcast know I always like to look at that because it tries to separate the back a bit from the offense. So I do like the player. I think it was a lot to give up. And I'm just a little shell-shocked from last offseason when they ripped up the offensive line. Like it's hard for me to say, how dare they send away Titus Howard and Juice Scruggs. Howard is the better player.
Right.
But they did this last offseason, and like they ripped up the offensive line and started over. And I just don't know if I trust that they'll replace them with better players. Does that make sense? Like that's where I am, because obviously the offensive line and the run game, while improved, the offensive line was improved, still wasn't good enough.
Right. So I think that the Titus Howard probably is a little more, monetary than play wise.
The contract.
The contract, it was probably the easiest way to to get some money off the books, because if he was, looking for a new deal, he, played right tackle in both guard spots for them last year. And so, if you want to potentially, re-sign Trent Brown, who was playing a bit of right tackle, you can probably do that at a cheaper rate because of his age. And it's probably cheaper to find guards than it would be to just bump Howard inside and pay him what he was making to play guard. So I kind of understand it in that way. Scruggs was, just kind of a backup, played sparingly. So he wasn't in their plans, I guess. But that is, to trade the offensive lineman and then try to bring in a running back is certainly a choice. And they had a real bad run game last year. I think they were 27th in success rate among teams on running back carries. And Montgomery was 24th of 49 backs in success rate. And again, it was originally reported as that was also going to be a 5th round pick for Montgomery. And then it sounds like there were other teams who kind of sniffed in that market, and that's what bumped it up. And then to go from a 5th to Juice Scruggs a 4th and a 7th, kind of, that is certainly a higher price to pay. But kind of, as we talked about, there's not a lot on the running back market unless you're really paying up for, a Kenneth Walker or a Travis Etienne. There's not going to be a lot in the draft outside of Jeremiyah Love.
That's my big takeaway from all of this, by the way. Like, this coupled with the Cowboys bringing back Williams on the extension, these teams do not love this running back draft. So it seems pretty clear.
Yeah. So, and Houston has kind of always been a team that if they want a player, they will overpay for him in a trade. I think we've kind of seen that a couple of times. So I think they were kind of fixated on having a guy like Montgomery, who I think is going to do well. Cap hits a $6 million and $9 million over the next 2 years. I think there's nothing guaranteed for 2027 unless he's on the roster by March 13th of next year, and it's like a very small roster bonus, so you can get out of it. Also, it's a lot to give up for a running back, but it does seem like they just wanted something stable at that position. And I think without giving somebody $14-15 million in free agency this year, it would be kind of hard to do that.
All right, let's take a quick break, come back, and then let's talk about Jeremiyah Love, because we're going to do combine winners and I would say question marks rather than fallers after the break. All right, we're back. Dan and I were both in Indianapolis for the combine, and which is interesting not only in terms of the athletic performances, but also in just the conversations you have with scouts, coaches, NFL media. And let's start with Jeremiyah Love, because he was both a winner, and I think a winner on and off the field is how I would describe it. Unsurprisingly, of course, right? This was kind of like almost everybody who came into the combine and was supposed to put on a show did. It felt like that was the theme of the week for me. And he came in, he's 6 foot tall, 213 pounds, and he ran a 4.3 second 40. And this has been mentioned a lot I think it was mentioned in the broadcast, but that's how fast Jahmyr Gibbs was. And Jahmyr Gibbs is much smaller than Jeremiyah Love. It reflects how he looks on the field. He has unbelievable long speed. He is an absolute nightmare in the open field. When he turns the corner, it is night. But I mentioned him as a winner, not just because of that, which was not too surprising, Dan, but because I came away from Indianapolis being convinced, unless it's all smoke, he is going to go a lot higher in the draft than I thought going into Indianapolis. I was like, great player, but we're coming off the Ashton Genty year. A lot of these teams in the top 10 have bigger needs at higher value positions. Top 10, sure. Kansas City at 9. I left Indianapolis with people being like, 9, good luck. Was that your experience? Before we talk about whether we think that's a good idea, what did you hear about Jeremiyah Love, and how do you feel about him now?
Yeah, very, very similar. And it kind of felt like it's one, definitely the player himself being great. I think it's also 2, the rest of the players at the position. I just like he's so
Yeah.
far and away
Yeah.
the best
That's a good
guy. It's not even like in the the Saquon Barkley draft when he went 2 overall. Like there were still people who liked a Nick Chubb. That was Jonathan Taylor draft class too.
Seriously?
Um,
They were all the same year? That's
and
crazy.
maybe Taylor's wrong, but I know
Uh,
Chubb was in there. Um,
right,
but
'cause yeah.
there were still backs in the class that people liked. That's not the case this year. I don't really know who running back 2 is. We had, some players come up. It might be his teammate. It might also, after we had, who was it, Mike Washington from Arkansas had like a really nice fun combine. Like he might have bumped himself up, but these aren't guys who are going to go, early day 2 either. So it's Jeremiyah Love and then a big jump. And then when we kind of talk about positional value, the other positions that we view as premium, especially on offense, they're just not there. There's one quarterback, there's a couple of good wide receivers, but probably only one we're really viewing as like a top 10 guy. And then it's kind of offensive linemen. And so it is, I think, just kind of all of these pieces coming together that are going to make Jeremiyah Love a very high draft pick.
Teams that I have heard associated with him since then, and since then, obviously Kansas City. That's the one everyone has. Working upwards, New Orleans. I've heard Washington, which is insane. I've heard the Giants, which is insane. The
Yes.
Titans, the Cardinals. I haven't heard anyone say the Jets, obviously with Breece Hall. I would not do it.
It's still hard.
Kansas City, you can justify to me. I think where I said this last week, but I get nervous if like one of the 3 edge rushers is there for Kansas City because that's such a big need for them. And I think there's a pretty big drop off after the big 3 of Bailey, Reese, and Bain. But a team like Arizona, you don't even know who's playing quarterback there. You cannot run it. So maybe it's part of we're going to bring in Malik Willis and him. I'm not going to lie, that would be fun.
Yep.
But are you competing with the others in the NFC West with your defense in the state? I just, Titans, I mean, just such glaring edge, even if you don't go wide receiver there because you feel like Tate that's too rich, fine. But like, can you really pass up on one of those edges there? You do not have pass rush. New Orleans, Washington would be unhinged to me. New Orleans is a little bit more defensible because I do feel like that roster is trending in the right direction, and it would certainly, and you kind of like your young quarterback, you've got Olave, you've got a decent pass rush, and if the big 3 edges are off there, I do feel like, I mean, but like, how could you not take like a Sonny Styles? I don't. But that's at least, I would say, more defensible. And then, like I said, Kansas City makes sense. But my general feeling about all of these spots, Dan, is if you're a team that needs edge and any of those 3 players are here, it's hard for me to pass up the value you get and to go for a running back.
Right. And, if even like to go back to the Chiefs, would you rather have an edge rusher on a rookie deal and maybe $12 million on Travis Etienne? Or would you rather trying to be finding, trading for, or, signing like a Jalen Phillips at like, $25 million a year and then having Jeremiyah Love? I kind of feel like you would rather bet on the younger edge rusher, and kind of that's the way to do it. So it just kind of feels like that's how we're viewing it. It does feel like he is kind of objectively one of the best players in this draft class. I do just find it really hard. Like, even though the Chiefs do make the most sense, the Chiefs sitting out free agency and hoping they draft Jeremiyah Love also doesn't feel like it makes a lot of sense to me, just in the way they would build this roster.
Can't do that. Cannot do that. I think, one of the other things I like about the Chiefs is at least the offensive line is headed in the right direction. And a lot of the teams I've mentioned, I don't feel that way about.
Yeah.
And that's the Genty lesson, right? I know most people seem to view as a better prospect, although it's a lot easier to say it now because people weren't talking that way last year. I'm just going to say that. Go back and watch everybody's Ashton Genty takes.
Yep.
But, that the lesson from that was like, you do not draft a running back if your offensive lines are not ready. Do we feel that the Saints line is ready? Do we feel that the Giants line is ready? Like, that just seems crazy to me. So yeah, I would love it in Kansas City. So funny. I was in Kansas. I was at Prime one night at like 2 a.m. and ended up chatting with DeMarco Murray, and we were talking about Jeremiyah Love. I was asking him, this is not like intel, and I was like, he's built a lot like you actually. And then I was like, so what are you doing now? He's like, I'm coaching running backs for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's like Brian went his fingers. Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Okay, winners. Again, sticking with the theme of predictable winners, all of the defensive players that people thought would balled out, starting with, of course, Sonny Styles, which is actually kind of a similar conversation. So maybe we can, non-premium value position, but an obviously dominant player at that position. And he was unbelievable. I mean, he's 6'5".
Yeah.
And he jumped 43.5 inches. He had an 11-foot, 2-inch broad and ran a 4.4640. By the way, that vert is the best linebacker vert since we've ever tracked it. He is a freak. I talked about him. I'm going to talk about him at length so we don't have to his tape is tremendous.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where the testing matches like what you see when he plays. And I think that's similar for a couple of guys that we're going to talk about. But I think that is a position where I think linebacker matters now. I think we've said it, that it's not a premium position, but I think when you look at how heavy offenses are starting to get, having a guy like Sonny Styles who can play whatever linebacker position you need to, he's good in coverage, can be kind of one of those guys that also helps in like when you're trying to some of the simulated pressures, you have him in the A gap where he can either rush or drop back in coverage. I think having a guy like that matters a lot. So I think we are seeing the positional value of a guy like that jump, and having someone who is that athletic, I think also that smart, certainly I think is going to all come together to be that's worth a high draft pick, in my opinion.
I think his impact would actually be kind of similar to, you could be like a Nick Amenwari type, who weirdly he kind of reminds me of. And Nick Amenwari was basically a Sam line, like
right.
But just in terms of the versatility, he allows you to play the run without, putting big bodies on the field at all times. Really good in coverage. Yeah, like that one where with Love, it's like harder for me to find destinations than it is for Sonny Styles personally.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at the top 10 and Jets probably, not, but Arizona, right. Sure. Tennessee, that's not what I would do, but
yeah.
Giants, yeah.
And that Denard Robinson defense would be a lot of fun.
Washington, yes. New Orleans, put him next to Demario Davis. Let him learn. Come on. Cincinnati, amazing. So there's multiple teams that I would be. I think where it gets tricky is if it really comes down to how you feel about the edges, and we're going to talk about one of them. And they're all a little bit complicated, right? There's no like obvious like, Myles Garrett type. There's really exciting edges, and I think the top 3 are certainly the top 3. But yeah, it all comes down because a lot of those teams I mentioned could use an edge more. But the question is, if you're like in Arizona, do you want a Sonny Styles who you feel like higher conviction in, or one of these pass rushers like his teammate Reese, knowing that it could end up being a much greater value because he rushes the quarterback, but there's less certainty about him. This is the draft. This is the calculus of it. But he balled out. David Bailey was blazing out there. He ran a 4.540. So that was like I sort of predictably great performance. Um, Moving on to the tight ends, I thought were the other big winners of the week. I mean, we should just talk about Kenyon Sadiq. He ran a sub 440. He broke the 40 record for tight ends, which was held by Vernon Davis, interestingly enough. But he did a million. He had a 43.5-inch vert. Like, he was putting up just alien numbers. Again, he was one of the players we talked about, but that's, wow. I guess that's the theme. Positional value be damned, right? Because that's a tight end who I think was more impressive than any of the receivers from a testing perspective.
Yeah, and it was nice to see because like you see it when you watch him, but again, like he doesn't put up crazy numbers. I think also because Oregon just kind of spreads the ball out a lot,
Yeah.
and a guy like even when you look at the receiver like Malik Benson did not have a lot of opportunity just because the ball went everywhere in that offense. But so many explosive plays that happen with Sadiq, and it's you know not every great athlete is like a top tight end, but like every top tight end is a great athlete. So it is good to see that. And then like just going down the line for all these tight ends that were good. There were a bunch of guys, Max Clare came out of Ohio State. Eli Stauer is going to be like an interesting guy where that's kind of like a slot only. Can he block enough? But like we just had like superhuman workouts from all of these tight ends. And then I think you go back to last year, we've seen how much better teams are at figuring out how to use rookie tight ends. Tight end not too long ago was a position where it took 2, 3, 4 years for these guys to make it because they were asked to do so much more than they were in college. But we're seeing a much smaller gap between those responsibilities right now. So yeah, I think this is a fascinating tight end class, and Sadiq going, somewhere in the mid first round. I've seen a couple of people put him on the Rams in mocks coming out of the combine, and just like in the amount of fun that would be, like absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the Rams started leaning into the 13 personnel last year, drafted another Oregon tight end, right? In the second round, they were first, it was second round. Yeah, second round. Would allow them, I feel like, to continue expanding that part of their offense because of the complete nature of his game. He blocks, right?
Yeah.
So you can, I mean, I would argue you can do a lot more than with him. You kind of touched on this in what we saw in Oregon, but he has a complete skill set that it feels like, coupled with his athleticism, that combination is what's been missing. It would be so like rammed, like if they were to take him instead of a corner after everyone all off season is. That's another team where watch what they do in free agency. Let's see if they pick up any corners, because that could be telling of how they could use these draft picks early on, and how they regard the corners, who I've barely talked about. Okay, so those are some of the winners. Oh, we have some bonus winners, but we can get to those at the end. Just guys who jumped out to us. But let's do some of the, I wouldn't say fallers, but some of the key questions coming out of the combine. So Rueben Bain Jr. Nobody knows how long his arms are. Came in at 30 7/8. Cassius Howell of Texas A&M was also even shorter. According to ESPN research, those two arm lengths are the shortest of any defensive lineman drafted in the first round ever, or since we started tracking. Who knows about 1942?
Right.
Then there was some conflicting reporting that actually teams measured his arms and they were longer, which, you know what it reminded me of? So I have a 2.5-year-old, and when you go to the doctor every 6 months to get him measured, they can weigh him,
Right.
but the arm length, like he'll get him, or an arm length, his total length, they'll put him on, the way it works is they put the kid on a table with like a ruler, and then the nurse just does their best. So they'll be like, oh wow, he was the 42nd size percentile. I was like, damn, really? Because he was like 75th. And they're like, let me do it again. And he wiggles a little bit. They're like, actually, he's the 90th percentile. And I'm like, you just can't measure babies, can you? Because they're wiggling. Yeah. And so when I saw this news coming in about Rueben Bain, I just pictured like teams trying to wiggle him while his arms, or measure him while his arms wiggle around. Anyways, whether it is slightly more or less, he has short arms. Dan, this is really tricky for me. I want to hear your thoughts on this because I am trying to work through it. I'm going to talk about him at more length, but I love his tape. I think it's awesome. I think he's explosive. He's like bendier than I would say the other rushers in a way, and certainly Bailey. He already has like a pretty decent repertoire of moves. He has a plan. His motor runs crazy hot. He's unbelievable against the run. So I want to be the person who says, screw history. The tape doesn't lie. And I'm still advocating for him to go top 10. But also saying screw history is not a thing that's historically worked out in the NFL draft. So how do you regard this and how much it matters or doesn't matter?
Yeah, well, I think we needed a picture of him and your arm lengths together, because I think that's how, the internet measures, size,
Sure, he would have loved that.
size questions at the combine. But yeah, so it is interesting because we came in thinking he was going to have short arms, and then he did. So we're not really breaking new ground here. And when you watch him play, a lot of times, like, the short arms are a feature and not a bug. I think he's learned to play like that. It's not like we're watching him try to use his arms and have a bull rush and use length to win in his ways. He has like this really good hump move when he gets, close and gets his shoulder into offensive linemen. So I think he already knows how to play there. So it's like we're not breaking news to him that his arms are short. So it is a place where I feel a little more comfortable, because I think he's already shown he has that tool in his bag to use that to his as an advantage. And he's not necessarily like running over to college tackles because he has like this great stiff arm and is running through these guys. So I think in a way it does lessen some of the concern. I think there are certainly going to be some times when he rushes against a NFL offensive tackle and they're just going to be able to get his arms on him, and it's going to, but I think there are a lot of other pass rushers who, for one reason or another, are going to get stood up by some, NFL caliber offensive tackles.
Yeah.
Too.
I love your point about how he already is able to mitigate that discrepancy to some, and true NFL tackles different. And, arm length matters, because if you come up against a guy with a large frame, he's able to use that to keep you at arm's literally at arm's length. But Bain has you talked about the hump. He's very good at closing the gap very quickly to the point where it actually doesn't become a factor. And it's just going to be the evaluators have to figure out if they feel like that translates to the NFL. Like I said, he's still a top 10 player to me, no question. Yeah. If he was at Kansas City at 9, I would frankly advocate for them to take him over the back. But it's definitely going to be, it's a real thing. It's something we have to acknowledge. Okay, so the other baller, it's not really, but kind of controversy in terms of numbers, was how fast did Carnell Tate actually run? 40 time came in 4.54. But then there are reports that actually it was lower, according to some people's watches. It's very funny. It's like, it reminded me of, the Drake like meme where he's like looks unhappy, but then it's like 4.54, disgusting. 4.49, cool, is how I thought. Like, just so silly. But it matters, it is a thing that not that small of a discrepancy, but he didn't blaze. He's people have pointed out that there have been a lot of receivers his size. He's 6'2", and he's pretty built. I would say he's not like a super skinny 6'2", that have run similar times. Naku is the famous one, but like CD Lamb, it's not how he wins. I would say he's plenty fast, but the thing about Tate's game, there's a lot of things I like about his game, is the thing I like, he separates downfield, and how he does so with his route running. And I think 40 time to me doesn't affect that at all, because I never watch him on tape and feel like he's not fast enough, Dan.
Right. And that's kind of my takeaway here. For the most part, the position I cared the least about 40 times is wide receiver. And it feels like publicly that is not the case because we love fast wide receivers. But my least favorite type of receiver is the guy who runs fast but doesn't know how to play wide receiver. And we've seen that fail a lot at the NFL level. We see, the Xavier Worthy, we see the AD Mitchells, the other reason, like last year, that I didn't really care if Matthew Golden was, 4.28 or not, whether like that was fast. Like he knows how to play wide receiver, and I'm still have, yes. So with Tate, like whether it's a 4.49 or a 4.54, it doesn't really impact his game. He is such a smooth, long strider. He knows how to get separation with how he sets up defenders. He has a lot like more wiggle at that size that I don't like. He is not like this, blazing fast guy who's going to just use speed. Like he knows the nuance of receiver. And so when you look at it, so I put together a metric every year for wide receivers, and it's basically like what you added to an offense. So it takes your yards per target and then subtracts what the quarterback averaged in yards per attempt to any other player on the field. Mm-hmm. So you basically just kind of get the difference between when you're targeted, when anyone else is targeted. This metric usually has some trouble with Ohio State receivers because there's usually a lot of them and they're all really good. But Tate this year comes out third in this class. Wow. So the fact that he was so good on that offense that he was able to produce in a per play way, when the like top scouted receiver and a guy high in this metric like come together, we have a pretty good hit rate in that. So the way Tate plays, I like a lot of it. I think he should be the number one receiver in this class, and his 4.54, it does not really do anything to me because I think he has so many other ways of getting open.
Yeah, we share that opinion. Mekhi Lemon was the only one I just because there were, he was the class that comes out of the combine, didn't win the interviews, and I don't know. I have very little I'll talk about him a lot as a player in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
That I bring that up not because I think it affects how I feel about a player, and I hate to be the person who's just like, here's some anonymous reports, but we have seen time and time again it does affect draft status coming out of this week if there's some reporting around, maybe guys being or guys who are conversely very impressive. So I like the player a lot, and I don't have him like he's not at Tate's level for me, but I do think he's a really great fit for a lot of offenses. So something to keep an eye on. I alluded to this, but I did want to mention a few other players who I would say put on impressive performances that could bolster their draft stock. I'll go first. I didn't mention this to you, but I want to mention, I practiced saying his name, Max Iheanachor, the ASU offensive tackle, Iheanachor, their right tackle. So he ran a 4.95 40, 321 pounds. And I which is impressive at that weight. And I mentioned that because it squares with how he looks on tape. So I don't like to give too strong opinions about offensive linemen. It's just not a position I'm super comfortable scouting. But I was watching him against David Bailey because I like to, let me see you against an NFL rusher. And I was really impressed with his speed and his foot speed in particular and his athleticism in that game, ASU against Texas Tech. And so to see that reflected in his testing numbers, for me, I feel like there's a lot of upside in the player.
Yeah, that's one of the. It feels like we did have some very athletic offensive linemen too, which is fun. And I'm like you, especially in the draft. The offensive linemen are probably the guys I have the least the opinions about because it is still the position I don't have as much experience in, but. Yeah, there are some fun guys coming into this class, and the amount of kind of first round offensive linemen that we might see. And again, it's kind of like the tight end thing. Not all we see. So the more you can bet on some of the athleticism from these guys and the way they can move, especially the way we see a lot of these the gap and zone schemes coming together now in the run game. It is having some of these guys that can really move is certainly helpful.
All right, who you got?
All right. We're going to stick to some big guys, and that is Caleb Banks, defensive tackle from Florida. He missed a lot of 2025 with an injury, and he's still a guy that's like kind of figuring out how to play defensive tackle. But in the previous 2 years, Florida, there's a lot of fun stuff on his tape, a lot of interior pressure, and we've seen how important having some big guys who can get quick pressure up the middle. And so he measured in 6'6", 327 pounds with a 5'04", 40, which, I mean, to move like that at that weight, and then did great in the jumps, 32 inches on the vertical, 9.5 on the broad. So you just kind of look at what he's able to do, having that big of a body, being able to be in the middle of the defense. And that's something that, back part of the first round can bet on some of that development. I think that could be potentially a lot of fun.
It's a good one too, because I feel like the defensive tackles right now could go in like any order. So testing numbers could be, and he was a player people had questions about because of the injury. So for him to test well is a big deal. I want to throw out one more. Dillon Thieneman, the safety out of Oregon, who ran a 4.35 40. He's 6 feet tall, and had a 41-inch vert. But the 40 was eye-opening. So I feel like a dummy because I come late to the draft every year. And while watching, I don't even remember, I think it was the Mendoza against Oregon twice, I texted Daniel Jeremiyah and I was like, hey, is anyone talking about 31 on Oregon, the white safety? And he was like, yeah, I have him 18 in my mock draft. I was like, all right, okay, cool. All right. So this is like, I thought I was being real slick. But as much as I liked him on tape, I didn't think he was this fast. He's pretty, I thought the closing speed was impressive, whether from a split safety or a single high look. And he's a great tackler. He just plays like his hair is on fire. And I know it sounds like I'm like, what? He's sneaky fast, but he really didn't look this fast. And so, I think game speed is different from straight line speed, no doubt. But for him to put up those numbers, I think if we thought he was like possibly first round before, to me, this cements it. He's going in the first round, and I'm pretty high on the player.
Yeah, and I think he always seems like he knows where he's going to. So I think it makes him look, maybe slightly slower actually, just because he's so smooth in where he goes. And there were some fun things that the Oregon defense did where they played like a lot of like 3-3-5, and he was like in the Buda Baker Cardinals, like middle of the three safeties, like three deep safeties, and then he was just kind of like unleashed to go anywhere, and that was a lot of fun to watch. So like you said, I think he can play in kind of any kind of scheme, and he lined up all over the field, like 13% in the box, 14% in the slot, and it's like 71% deep. And just the way he was able to kind of fire downfield seemed like he always knew where the rush lane was. And when you combine it, kind of like we said with Sonny Styles, you combine the mental acumen that I think he showed a lot on the field with the athleticism that he has. It's a fun prospect, especially for safety, which again, we've seen as a position that I think is going to matter more, especially when you have the versatility like that.
Would it be too on the nose if Minnesota replaces Harrison with him? Or he's there, I guess. Would be a great fit. He would be Brian Flores. I would love that. Yeah. Is there anyone else you wanted to highlight as someone who impressed you this week?
There were, so as much as I did say that, wide receiver testing doesn't do a lot, Bryce Lance, who is Trey Lance's younger brother, wide receiver from North Dakota State. He's awesome. He's a lot of fun. He does not have a lot of like nuance to the route tree, which I think is also part of what the North Dakota State offense was. It was a lot of it just goes and hitches, but man, he's fast, he's smooth, he knows how to win in that way where it's not just straight speed that he's winning with. And he comes out favorably. I was talking with some of the metrics I do for wide receivers, comes out very favorably with Christian Watson and Jalen Coker, who were two guys that stood out on the FCS level. And Bryce Lance actually comes out first in this class for that metric I put together. So to have him look as athletic as he is, a day two dart throw as kind of a guy who can give an offense juice, it was a lot of fun to watch.
Bryce Lance is like too confusing of a name.
Yeah. I very much have to make sure I am
Bryce
saying that slowly when it comes out. Yeah.
I would remiss if I didn't highlight that the Arkansas quarterback Taylen Green.
Yeah.
Nate shouted out. I asked him, "Is there any quarterback who do some freaky stuff?" Ran a 4.37 40, which is an insane number for a quarterback. He's one of the fastest ever, obviously. We'll see, but as far as dart throws later rounds, why not? Yeah, that was an interesting one. Okay, so obviously free agency really kicks off next week, so I am planning on keeping this cadence, so taping Tuesday for Wednesday, but it's going to be an absolutely insane few days, so I'll be putting out stuff everywhere as well. And go check out, if you're listening to this, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@MinaKimes. I'm going to publish shorts there reacting to some of the news, as it surely will come out on Monday and Tuesday, in addition to being on TV. Dan, can you tell folks where they can find your work throughout free agency?
Yeah, be doing some similar stuff, posting a lot on Blue Sky, which is probably where I'll link everything, but I'll probably also be doing some short form video, which everyone at the Combine was like, you should be doing that more. So I guess I'm going to take that advice for free agency. I'll have some things, some stuff for positions in the draft up at FTN. And I think I'm going to grade free agents and stuff too on Snaps and Stats. So I'll have all that linked up on Blue Sky if you take a look.
This time next week, pardon me, Kyler Murray could be a Viking, a Steeler, a Dolphin, Falcon, a Jet, who knows? So I'm excited to react to that. It's so great having you on the show. As always, Dan, go check out Dan's work. Go follow him on Blue Sky and everywhere else to get some of those reactions he discussed. I'll be back next week. In the meantime, I will be recapping the Love is Blind finale with David Dennis Jr. Over at Viewer Discretion Pod. We are contemplating which shows to start next. So if people have thoughts on that, maybe Paradise, I don't know, is one that's come up. And in the meantime, thank you as always to the folks at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Smecki, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, and Tucker Taschen. See you guys next week.